Friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are, and you're probably as shocked as actually I am, because we've got a familiar face on the screen, Mr. Dickson, and as you can see, he's in a beautiful part of the world. Little competition for those who can send us in a message as to which part that is. We won't go into too much details, but it's a wonderful location, and as you can see, beautiful weather this year. I'm on almost the opposite side of the world to him, and a huge amount of our difference, and not in such an exotic location. However, it's good to be back, Steve. Thanks for joining us again. It's been a long time. We've had a lot of people almost giving up hope and throwing the towel in. They thought we might have had a divorce, a podcast divorce, first of, I think, maybe. Or else, I had one guy said, surely be to God, the two of you haven't run out of things to talk about.
Well, I can assure all of our listeners with great confidence that it's neither the former nor the latter. Indeed, the latter, I don't think, Chris, is a reasonable proposition in any environment. If we did run out of things to talk about, what we just do is take a few pints, and we'll end up going back to the beginning and starting all over again. I think we've not spoken about it before, so but I doubt that will be the case. It's nice to be back. I'm sorry for the location. I am on location this week, but let's hope that the Wi-Fi and the signal holds out for the both of us. So I know you're traveling at the minute as well.
Well, what a beautiful segue where you said there, and we go all the way back to the beginning. So what I was thinking is, after so long, when we first started this, obviously we did it during COVID, and it was for a bit of fun and also to keep in touch with people and just try and get people involved. But going back then, we were talking about lessons learned, words of wisdom, what would, should, could happen once COVID finished, etc. And I think it's right now to put that behind us. That's a phase of our industry that will go down for who knows how many generations to come, when they talk about how aviation overcame and how aviation became so important, etc. But to be fair to all the people that have battled through it and been in positions where they've been under pressure to to come back, bring back better, or build back better, whichever way it wanted to be, we've put out some thoughts and some ideas. And I just thought I'd like to ask you now, what do you think is the most important things that have been learned over the last 2 and a bit years, and how those lessons should be put into practice moving forward? And not to push you into a certain avenue or cul-de-sac, but a few things that on my mind is, realistic pricing, and those that are responsible to give a contract shouldn't just be trying to make it so difficult for the supplier, but they should be realistic with the pricing. And also there's a sort of a trait at the moment with contract chasing, even before the contracts come to the end of their term. So some practices that are not unexpected, but I would suggest unwelcome.
Yeah, look, Chris, that's an interesting comment, because there's a little fella about to say hello there.
Hello, Evan.
So
How are you, son?
For those that are on audio only, my son just decided to pop into the picture and say hi to Chris. Look, interesting. I hadn't prepared for that, Chris. But look, I mean, it's two things that come immediately off the top. I would say the value of competence and experience, number one, and also the the value of relationships in supply chain. So just in terms of number one, I would say we saw a lot of skills drain from the industry. We saw the massive pressures that placed on the recruitment side of the business recently, and still to this day. We've seen the airlines and ground handlers, and all involved in the delivery of airline passenger and cargo services, having to focus much more on training than ever before. Heavy training, heavy recruitment pipeline leads to heavy training demand and pressures. And I would say, look, losing some of that capability, or the competence, which drives service providers' capabilities, has been massively underestimated. You know, and I think that has been one of the biggest challenges that we've all had to contend with. Coupled with that, and it's something I've spoken about before in the other side of the two sides to every coin, of course. But in terms of experience, I don't always put the same level of emphasis, Chris, on the value of experience as I do in terms of competence, capability, and aptitude.
Yes. Yeah.
You've heard me say that before. The reason being is, you can have sort of 1 to the power of 20. And that means therefore that from an experience perspective, it's not there. But in this way, what I mean it's played out is, whilst competence drives capability, experience drives judgment. It drives instinctful responses to events. It drives, just that little bit of know-how, that little bit of wisdom, as in, I've seen this before, things are going off the boil here. I think I need to start to do something to correct it and fix. That's the value of the experience that we've lost. And I think that is going to be felt for a long, long time, as, people who've worked in our sector have done so for a long time, have just had enough, or they've gone off to out to pasture, and enjoying their well-earned retirement or time away from work. So I think that's those two things probably go hand in hand. The second piece, Chris, I think that we've learned massively is those businesses who have recovered quickest, those businesses who have had the least amount of disruption, those businesses who have cancelled the least amount of flying, are the ones typically that have had, and some of this will surprise people, but the ones that have had the better relationships with their suppliers. They've had open conversations about the recovery. They've had open discussions about, covering some of the fixed costs and overheads of their suppliers. They've had open discussions about the need for margin improvement. They've had open discussions about the need for, cost recovery in terms of escalation or labour rates and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And they've had a sort of a very, transparent. Now, I'm sure there's always been difficult conversation in part of that, but if you look at the way that the likes of some of the leading carriers have responded, with the same challenges that everybody has faced in the industry, it's been done in a very different way. The likes of Ryanair, for example, who made some changes to their supply chain arrangements prior to COVID, took some services in-house, although it's through a labour hire company, essentially, ABM. Handling. They've had essentially an open book model, a cost plus model. So it's been within Ryanair's interest to make sure that they've had very transparent conversations. Why? Because that cost then comes directly back and bites them in the backside. Unlike some of the other carriers out there, whom I won't name, that haven't recovered so well, who've said, well, that's your problem, not mine. Well, actually, that's not the case, because it will become your problem when they can't handle your services, when they don't have enough, they're not paying enough in market rate to get people back into the business. So I think the value of those sort of, very tightly knit supplier customer relationships, Chris, have become ever more relevant, and I think we are seeing ways in which contracts are being changed for the good. Now, I know there's still some people that would sort of suggest that's not universally felt. I don't expect it will ever be universally felt. In fact, there's never been a universal approach to contracting, but I think there is now the ability to have a better conversation and a more transparent conversation than ever before. So I think that is probably a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree, Steve. And what about this contract chasing now, and people being placed under pressure, especially those that have certain financial backers, financial pressures, and now they're chasing things rather than doing things for the right and the benefit from a business sustainability perspective.
Well, I mean, that's always going to exist, Chris, to an extent. I think, we saw what a lot of people used to term the race to the bottom. In the handling space in particular, in the 2000s in the UK and Europe, in the mid sort of 2010s. We saw that sort of people moving away from that. I'm actually looking at much more sustainable business. We saw ground handlers saying, actually, if this station can't wash its face, we will exit the business. We saw training providers, exit training contracts with big carriers because they couldn't make it work. We saw facility providers saying actually these are below market rents and kicking people out, and we saw all sorts of stuff going on that was good. That they actually said you've got to be able to wash your face, in any contract that you take on, and that was good for the industry. The problem was, I guess, it started to escalate the cost base of the providers, and that meant that there was a competitive disadvantage in some cases. So those with big pockets then came in, and I guess I'm now doing a little bit of repeating the exercise, Chris, that happened 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, whereby we saw, sadly, we lost a lot of business, we lost a lot of organization from the sector. So I think I would say, look, there will be a reset. I think it's interesting. I've been doing some let's say work recently, but we have been doing a piece of work for a client recently, just around the level of intervention that should exist within the difficult to say exactly what we're working on because it's a sensitive project, but the level of intervention and intervening controls that we might expect from government or from regulator versus allowing the free market to do its own thing.
Yes.
And of course that is quite a wide spectrum of opportunity and levers that one may want to exist. So some markets are still heavily controlled on air transport capacity with bilaterals. Markets like the US are almost entirely open skies. Allow anybody to fly there with any amount of capacity. Other markets are still heavily controlled for domestic flying, like Malaysia, for example. Bizarre that Malaysia would still control domestic capacity, whether that's on passenger or cargo, it exists. There are markets where ground handling is heavily regulated. There are markets where ground handlers just do their own thing and apply to the airport and off they go. And not a Dickson ground handling services, heaven forbid. Disclaimer: not in the pipeline, ladies and gentlemen. Could just set up shop, providing we've got a customer contract. There are levels of AOC startup, working with new airlines, Chris, in the AOC regulatory space. There are some regulators that take a very heavy oversight on every single I being dotted and T crossed. Some would say, yes, that's absolutely the way things do it. There are regulators that take a much more sort of, cursory approach to the systems and application of systems. And when I say systems and standard, I don't mean systems technology, I mean safety management systems, for example, the application of compliance and assurance within the organization rather than every single detail on a page. So different ways to skin the cat, as always. And I would say, look, it's interesting to see how this plays out. But a bit of competition probably is healthy. Too much probably is not the best thing either. So finding the right balance is probably the best thing.
And there's a good bit of balance there, eh? They're showing the importance of the next generation.
Sit down. Okay,
nice to see you, Evan.
Right, there we go. Okay, good questions, Evan, Chris.
Yeah, nice to see it, son. But good point there, Steve. And it's important now that, and I think at this point we should also say that those that are in the positions of responsibility, and we've spoken about many people on our episodes, but I've also interviewed an awful lot of them, and it's hats off to them for doing what they've done during these difficult periods. So it's not you and me just sitting there saying, yes, that's right, no, that's wrong, etc. It's full respect to everybody that's been doing it. It's all the lads and ladies out there who are looking after the logistics business. Well done, fair play to you. But we're just commenting now on some of the things that we've experienced. Now, one of the things that you mentioned there, you said about training. Now, I felt, and this is just my opinion, so please feel free to disagree, but I felt that the training was becoming all pastel coloured. It was all watered down. There was too much of it. People were feeling that they had to do certain things to boost their skills base and everything. And I think now the training has to return back to basics, more black and white, so that it's related to business sustainability and making an immediate impact on the business. So not where people just attend a course, they get a certificate at the end of it. They never do anything with that apart from whenever they're going for a new job, they keep adding to the big pile of certificates. And I think that factual and relevant training, which comes back to what you were saying about competence, is so important now.
The other thing there, Chris, I think to add is, sorry, a little bit of pink guava juice irritated my throat.
Oh, pink quit. There it goes to show the difference, eh? A Felton boy, if somebody said to me years ago, pink guava juice, I'd have had to go and look it up. Pink bloody guava juice. I can't believe it. For me, it would have been Ribena with a lot of water.
That's right. To eke it out as long as you could.
Yeah. Right. Keep the bottle looking as though it was just bought.
Chris, I think the other thing we've got to say is, yeah, look, I agree with you on the training front, but I think we need more. We need to extract better benefit from anecdotally led training as well, evidence-based training, anecdotes that we lost. And I accept that these things happen for a reason, and the reason, of course, was that the operational people who can provide those anecdotes were required in the operations environment to deliver the service rather than deliver the training. So instead, what we've often had, or what we've seen, certainly in my example, and some people may disagree, but in my recent experience of working with clients, and I think you would say the same, Chris, from where you are today, is that we've seen much more academic, theoretical outcomes being delivered, or a training being delivered that deliver outcomes on a tick box exercise that do not give the value or the benefit of sharing some of those anecdotes and experiences with the classroom. And I think that is something we need to be very careful of, because in the live environment, it might well be the first time that they experience the operator experiences, hearing stories of how this went well or how that went poorly, or what that means actually, what the reality is, or why that not the what, Chris, and not the how, but the why. Yeah, because it's the why that gives the context to the explanation of, and actually making that penny drop. The penny can go in, but it doesn't drop until you give the contextual setting with the why. And I think that is really important for us going forward.
Yeah, and I love my acronym, and why stands for what helps you. And if it's not given, and it's not given in the right context, like you said, it's such a waste, because people, they're not joining the dots up. They can't see the true colours, right. And it's so important. Now, people. That's the focus now at the moment. And Steve, we spoke long times ago about people who are going on strikes and why, and all manner of industries that were affecting the recovery of COVID, and now headlines again, especially back in our country, they were talking about strikes. What's your position on that?
Where do we start, Chris?
Well, I see you touching the crucifix there, so you're getting a little bit of inspiration.
Yeah, some divine intervention that would stop all these buggers going on strike. Look, let me first put it out there. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm a conservative who sits right of centre. Very clear, and I would never shy away from that. That means I enjoy less regulation. I enjoy a liberal approach to life, and I enjoy small government. I also, come from the reality, Chris, that the reason that any business exists is to make money. And we operate in whether we want to hear this word or not, some people think it's a dirty word, but we operate in a capitalist society, and we've got to compete with others who've got that approach. So that's, I guess, is the starting point. However, I do agree that the unions, exist for a purpose, Chris, which is to create equilibrium. Another word I use quite a lot is to maintain equilibrium between employee and workplace relations, and that's really important, more so now than ever before. But there comes a point that industrial action for the sake of industrial action, when it just becomes a threat, and often now it's being used as an empty threat, or a threat that is real and tangible. Empty threats in terms of just posturing, just to try to get somebody to listen. Now, if it's been used as an empty threat, that makes me more nervous than it being used as a real threat. Why? Because the empty threats are being used because employers have got cloth ears. So that, for me, is a much bigger problem, Chris, than when it becomes a real threat where negotiations have potentially broken down, and there therefore becomes the impending possibility of a very disruptive set of industrial action or actions that would damage the employer, for the long term, and the sustainability and the profitability of the entity. So I think you've got to look at both and how both are playing out. If you look at the likes of Transport for London and ASLEF and all these buggers and what's that clown Mick Lynch at the RMT, I just think they've completely lost all public support for any of their action. In the same way that Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion, all these idiots, have lost all public support for their action. Why? Because it's damaging and devastating and stopping people going about their ordinary lives. Now, working to rule, on the other hand, or only not working overtime shifts or not taking additional duties that your employer may ordinarily expect you to do, is very different in terms of the impact of that action versus these stoppages that affect millions and millions of people going about their daily lives. So I would say, look, I expect that there has to be, somebody has to shake that tree. But if the unions think that they can go on getting 12-13% pay awards for the next decade, they are on a hiding to nothing. Let me be very clear. That will destroy our society. It will destroy the economic fabric of our nation, as well as probably our continent in Europe, and it will destroy the business for the long term. So I would say, if unions are all about one for all and all for one, then shouldn't they be acting in the interest not only of their members, not in the interest of their subscriptions, but also in their members, and ensuring that there's a sustainable employer that exists after this is all over, rather than just for today? Because people sacrifice their todays for our tomorrows. That's a hint.
Correct.
Very apt. Just 1 week after Remembrance Sunday, but a phrase worthy of a call out indeed.
No, Steve, fair play to you there. Now something, and I don't know, I'm not going to say naive, but wishful thinking. When people go into these strike discussions, right? And this reminds me of my early days, early teens, when I was working on building sites to get a bit of extra money. And in many cases, you got paid for what you produced, but your production was quality based and you got more money. And when people are talking about, cost of living, blah, 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 of course, that's important. But another ingredient, why do they not talk? So let's just say a simple example. So if a company is being pushed by its workforce, why not say, look, okay, there's an extra whatever the percent of a percent is based on improvement in safety or improvement in quality or reduction in customer complaints. And why not have it based on that, so people can actually relate something to an outcome rather than just because of people, like you said, threatening or posturing or relevance of argument? Why not do that?
I think they have. I think employers do. I mean, if you look at the NHS, look at the NHS. The NHS have been trying to extract productivity improvements, but the unions have got cloth ears. They don't want to hear that. The RMT have refused drivers doing additional weekend shifts or additional night shifts in return for improved pay. That happens today, Chris, and they've still got cloth ears to this.
Yes, no, but what I'm saying is, why can't people, wake up to it? I remember. So I'm just go with me a little bit here. There's a little story that guys used to say to me when like I said, this is going back 40 years or so. And the joke was, this lad turned up onto a building site and he asked the foreman for a job. And the foreman looked at him and said, right, you're a fine figure of a lad. He said, can you work hard? He said, yeah, I can. Of course I can. He said, that's why I've come here. So he said, right, here's the cement mixer. He said, there's 100 yards up there. He said, through that narrow pathway. He said, there's my bricklayers. He said, I want you to supply quality mixed cement to those guys so they don't have to stop working, because they're paid by the amount of bricks they make. So he said to him, can you do that, son? He said, yeah, of course I can. And he said, right, this is the wheelbarrow you have to use, and I'll be back this afternoon and tell you whether you got the job or not. Is that okay? And the young lad said, yeah, of course it is. So the young lad's doing the mix according to the instructions. He's pouring it into the wheelbarrow. He's wheeling it along. And after about 4 or 5 times, he realised that the wheel was squeaky and it kept going. So anyhow, he kept doing all this all day, and he was getting some of the bricklayers shouting at him because he wasn't quite keeping up. So anyhow, comes back and the foreman turns up dead on time. He said, right, son, how you doing? He said, yeah, I think I've done all right. So he said, should I give you the job or not? And he said, well, I think so. He said, well, let me ask you one question. He said, was the wheel squeaking on the wheelbarrow? And he said, yeah, it was, he said. So the foreman says to him, how was it squeaking? And he went, the foreman said, you're sacked. Don't ever come here again. He said, what? He said, why? He said, it should have been going. But seriously, if people are agreeing on certain measures, Steve, and those measures aren't materialising, then I think that's the grounds for clarity. And we were talking about competence early. Things have got to be clearer than they are now, I think, at the moment. And it's too much leverage. It's like a tug of war.
Yeah.
And it goes one way, then it goes the other way. And the most exciting thing about a tug of war is watching people when they're equally pulling at each other, because you're waiting to see what the outcome is.
I mean, Chris, there's no better business or employee relations than one that does not require the existence of a trade union. To have employees collectivize, I see as a failure. If businesses have got in place the right structures for communication, the right organization for engagement, the right pay and reward packages, the right incentives, then there's no need to collectivize. Why would one need to collectivize if all of those things are in place? They are in place because employers do not have the right structures, culture, engagement, with their workforce. So I know a couple of examples, where there are large businesses, relatively large businesses, multi-million euro turnover, employing licensed trades, engineers, mechanics, with great apprenticeship schemes, and people coming through the system and so on and so forth. That have got no union representation. That ordinarily would have. All of their competitors do, but this one does not. Why? Because they share profits with the staff. They're very open in engagement. They're very open about production capability. They've got variable rate to pay based on when sort of shifts and allowances, and when you want to come to work. Sorry, when they want to come. This is the problem when you want to come to work these days. Is all sorts of considerations that mean that the employees have had no desire or requirement to collectivize, unlike all of their competitors in I would say the majority of Europe. So there are very good examples out there, Chris, of good. We probably look at the bad too often because it's the bad that create the noise and create the news. And as we always know, it's never good news that is worthy of being on the news. It's always the bad news that's worthy of news. So I would say, look, we've got to get better at it, Chris. I mean, that's it. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, but it's definitely food for thought, though, Steve, isn't it? And even now with the way the way government's going, but also, and I know how close you are to Rishi, things looking better now. The old currency markets are a little bit more in favour, and things seem to be a little bit stable. But
I'm not sure that was good for me or you, but there we go.
Well, that's a different story. But as far as now stability moving forwards, it's going to be tough for people for the next couple of years. Undoubtedly.
But if these jokers who write the Express and the Guardian and Observer thought that the government did a good job over the last 2 years in protecting jobs and paying out furlough, where exactly did they think this money was coming from?
Yeah.
So look, I'm happy to pay more tax. I'm in a position to do so. So people might say, oh, well, you don't represent the majority. Well, okay, maybe fair enough. But the those that have got small businesses will be taxed more, as all of us will be. Those that are in the biggest corporations will be taxed more and paying more, and that's because over the last 2 years we've had people that frankly didn't want to go to work. We've got a massive production gap. Our productivity in the UK is woeful compared to some of our European neighbours. People need to get out of their houses and go back to the office. Stop this working from home nonsense. We've got to get the economics, the pound back into the system, into the retail environment, into the cities, to help improve the overall sort of viability going forward. But I think those people that were taking holidays during all of COVID, spending lots of said, "Oh, I've never had so much cash. Oh, I've never had so much cash. Oh, it's great. It's fabulous." Because a lot of people said that, Chris. That was not unique. That was the majority of people said, "Oh, I've never had so much cash." Because they're sitting at home not going out to spend it. So if they thought that cash was free, then they are numbskulls and they've got another thing coming. So look, none of us would like to pay more tax. I don't think anybody wants to pay more tax. As I was taught a very early lesson in life, there's only two things certain in life. One is death and the other is taxes. So we will have a greater tax burden now than ever before, and people better get used to it.
Yeah. No, it's going to be
because
tougher
it's not
times.
us that suffer. If we think we're suffering, think about your children and your grandchildren.
That's what I was going to say. I think, Steve, one of the things
you're sitting there ordering your cases of wine every Friday night and your curries and your takeaways, during COVID, sitting at home. Well, I'm glad you all enjoyed it, but you better pay a bit more tax to stop the next generation having to do the same.
Yeah, but I think in years to come, and not that many, people will be looking back and they'll be looking at what impact on society this has had and how long it's going to take to correct it and let people start to think about things that are important again, which is their own ecosystem.
Well, Chris,
we said, not just the business.
But we said that jobs were being protected that should not have been through furlough. There were jobs that were being paid for by the taxpayer that people should have been made redundant. I'm sorry, as hard as it is, they should have been made redundant, and they should have gone deeper, faster, and earlier, and got people off the payroll and out of the employment. That would have saved £2,500 a month at the cap that the government placed on the furlough. So jobs that were no longer sustainable during COVID, and when you knew it, and they hung on and hung on and hung on artificially, and then at the end that furlough came to an end, they were made redundant. I think that's an abuse of taxpayers' money, personally.
Yeah, and like X Factor and all good films, we cut at such an important part. To be continued.
Chris, it's great to be back.
Good man. I'm going to go off my. So when Salem wakes up with his Bart Simpson nightgown on, he's going to get a surprise. So we're back, Salem. To everybody who's listening, thanks very much. To everybody who's responsible for what's happening, good luck. It's greatly recognised and a lot of respect for you.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
Cheers, Sam.